So, be ruthless is not actually the theme of our event. Although it was a great example, and I am still brushing the bus tire tracks off my back right now after that session. So really, they were sort of voluntold for that session. So they changed their schedules around to be here. Thank you both for doing that. Up next, we have Al McElmon from CoreLogic to talk about managing data at scale. Al.
Mic'd up? There we go. First off, I am giving out a Furbo dog camera. So I assume this for taking photos of your dogs. I guess cats don't apply since they're not all that interesting to look at on a camera. Full disclosure, I only have cats. So first name on the list is John Whitney. Is John in the room? Next is Harmon Gill. Thank you. Alrighty. So typically I have not enough content to fill my presentation. This time I'm going to have to move it pretty quick. So they asked for a slide for credentials. These are the credentials I typically care about the most. Trying to come up with how many of these RESO conferences I've done, kind of a blur. But I did just survive through my 40th birthday a couple weeks ago, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. So for those of you who are the youngest ones in the room, you'll still be here doing this, 15 years later. So this time around, I am doing another live survey. But this time it's a little bit with more of a twist. It is a contest. So if you go to this website, menti.com, and enter the code below on your phones or on your laptops, you'll be entered into a quiz show type environment. You get to enter your name. So we are giving out bar tab, free drink at the bar for the top 3 places. So when you fill out your name, you can put something fun in there if you want to, or it'll be easier to find you if you put in your real names. Anthony Jordan, our data engineer, is in the back right corner of the room, so he'll be able to hand out prizes towards the end. So we're going to do a little bit of a warm-up, kind of give everyone a little bit of time to get into the system and find some ways to just kind of grease the wheels a little bit, get you used to the type of format that we're going to be doing.
Excuse us, for the old folks in the room, could you put the previous slide up for one more second?
QR code. And this is a totally real, not AI-generated photo of myself. Not here, that's for sure. All right, got about 139 people in, still going up. All right, couple more seconds. All right, let's roll. So some of these questions, the faster you answer, the more points you get. How long have you been involved with RESO? Did this too long? I did this slide last time, and I was really impressed with the results that came out. I'd even seen someone post the results on LinkedIn. I'm like, those are interesting stats. And I'm like, oh, that's from my presentation. That's kind of cool. All right, a lot of new people. Love to see it. Similar flair on the last question. How long has your company been involved with RESO? I know a lot of you are new to the event, but perhaps your company's been coming for years, so similar question for this one. On these first couple slides, you get about 20 seconds. It's going to be down to 15 on some of the remainders. Nice haircut, nice lack of haircut, more like it. Awesome. 10 years, that's great. This next one, I believe, gets a little more technical. Do you prefer real-time or replication for your applications? Do you want people to download the data and distribute it and use it from their database, or do you want them to query you in real time? Real-time query. Okay, good bit of both. So as you'll notice on this question, all of these answers, whether you get them or right or wrong, is purely my opinion. So there's a lot of these that you might not disagree with. Happy to talk about that at the bar. How much data do you download per day? If you do real-time replicate or real-time access, how much do you process in a day? All right, across the board. I think this is the last one of the warm-up questions. How often do you pull data? So how often are you querying for your replication, or how often are you performing new real-time queries? Less than 1 minute, I love to see that. Less than to equal to 15 minutes, total tie on the two of those. The only one that I marked wrong for this question is if you do not understand this question at this point. If you're at this point in the stage, or if you're at this stage in RESO and you don't understand this particular question, please hit me up and we'll talk about it a little bit more afterwards as well. All right, so this is our first round, our leaderboard. This is where everyone's standing right now. Press F in chat, nice. Alrighty. So we're gonna have a little bit of content in here. It's not all fun, but we're gonna talk a little bit about reconciliation. Reconciliation, in a nutshell, is the process that's comparing your data set to the data set that exists at the source. So that might be comparing what you have in the MLS to comparing what's in your local database. It helps you instill confidence that your data is accurate. It's very often that your permissions can change upstream, or a listing can go into a status that you no longer have access to. So if you're not reconciling on a regular basis, you might have a listing that looks like it's active, but really it's been deleted because you're not going back and double checking. I recommend that you perform this at least daily. On our platforms, we have some resources where we'll do this every 15 minutes if it's a particularly problematic resource. But you need to do every resource, do it often, and employ multiple strategies. So one of the strategies we use is the basic, compare the one set of data to the other one, just pull all the keys and compare them. We also do something we call child reconciliation. When we see a media modification timestamp change, we'll go down and repull that listings data for media to do the same thing. Some people just do counts. That's kind of a low budget way to do reconciliation, pull the counts of both of these resources and see that they match. But all of those strategies are going to help you ensure that your data is up to date. But I do recommend using more than one strategy. Another thing that we're going to start doing on our platform, and it's something that I would like to start kind of getting in the minds of others, is something we're calling a record signature. So anytime a record changes in our database, we are giving it a new value. So this could be a checksum, this could be it could even be a modification timestamp, but the real point of this value is to have something that is not completely tied to modification timestamp to let you know that the data has changed. There are multiple situations, and we're going to get into this in a little bit, where you're going to see where you don't want to update the modification timestamp for every listing. You want to know that they've all been changed, but you don't want to download 200 million listings at once. So for the vendors, the basic strategy here is to give a record signature value. It needs to be different every time the listing changes, and it needs to be delivered as fast as possible. For consumers, pretty much during your reconciliation process or during your data download process, just see that this value has changed and act on that. For us, we're kind of toying with just a checksum. It's easy enough for us to check some of the row, and you know that something within the row has changed. All right, moving on to our second round. These are questions around reconciliation. I think there's a little more wrong answers in this one. Do you reconcile your local data set? Doesn't really matter the method you use. Do you use some sort of reconciliation? Nice. Good. No, this is a lot higher actually than I expected. Based on monitoring our traffic, I would guess that some of you are exaggerating a little bit, but but it is nice to see that that people are taking an active interest in making sure this data is up to date. It's critical that you not fall behind and show old data. Oop. Sorry, go back. How often are you reconciling your data? For those 93 of you who said that you're doing it, how often are you actually going through? Once per day. That kind of leads the pack. It's the most common. Some of these data sets take quite a while to reconcile. So it might even be time prohibitive to be able to even go through and pull all of those keys for, again, 200 million records or however many in your data set. Just a question that just popped up. Is anyone in here doing it more than once a day? Nice. Yeah. Lots of Lord of the Rings references here in the chat. How are you actually doing your reconciliation? So a lot of answers here, but this is just the methodology that you're using for most of your reconciliation. If you use multiples of these, pick the one you rely on the most. So pulled a fast one here. You know, in repulling all the data every time, it does work, but it's more expensive for you and for your vendor. If you're not using MLS data, obviously you're in the wrong quiz show. Child reconciliation, I think, is another good methodology. Comparing the counts, I have that marked as wrong, even though it does provide a good rough estimate. You know, especially, I would not recommend reconciling the counts if that's all you do. But if you have multiple methods, reconciling the counts should be fine. So what makes you confident that your data is always up to date? This one changes the format a little bit. Since we are in a time crunch, I'll probably just go ahead and push this one forward. That is about 40 answers. I lied. We are the source, I like that. So yeah, lots of different options here. Confident is subjective, I will give that. Our IT guy, great platform, that one I like to hear, especially when they're talking about me. Trust my data team. Okay. More Lord of the Rings, jeez. All right, second round score. All right, moving along, moving along. All right, talk a little bit about the metadata. So some of the challenges with the metadata is that the files can be excessively large, especially if you're working with an aggregator, and the metadata might not be accurate. One of my biggest suggestions here is to embrace the new fields and enumerations resource that was talked about. The developer conference has been talked about for a long time, but it's finally starting to come to fruition. So embrace that as it comes. If you're a vendor, start offering it. If you're a consumer, start consuming it. We're actually going to add a multi-lookup for originating system name to our data set so that if you're working with an aggregator, you can see that Triad MLS has these fields and Canopy has these fields. So you can actually go through and see where the actual, or which fields belong to which MLS within an aggregated system. But the biggest recommendation is to just actually use the metadata. Dan and I looked at this stat years ago, and what was it, like 15%? So 12% of people have actually ever queried the metadata on the platform. So it's embarrassingly low. Those of you who do it, great. But there needs to be more progress there. And I think the fields and enumerations resources or the lookup resource is a great step towards that. All right, so some questions around metadata. So is your code base MLS specific? It's kind of vague, but I'm curious to see how this pans out. Okay. Not really a right or a wrong answer, and yes or no here. If you don't have a code base at all, then again, probably the wrong quiz show for you. But yeah, no, there's really not a right or a wrong answer there. How do you handle MLS-specific changes? I apologize for the timeline. I know these questions they're starting to get a little more nerdy and a little more dense. We got to keep it moving. I am honestly shocked at the number of metadata-driven changes that are coming up on this, considering how few people actually end up querying it. But all these are great ways to kind of utilize the metadata to enhance not only your application, but your team's operations. We're all liars, yes. So similar to the last question, but what do you use the metadata for? Manual lookup for debugging is what I find most people end up using it for. Driving automated configuration, that came up in the last one. Observability scripts, one that I love. Or you just don't use it at all. 10 very honest people here. I like it. Server time zone, another great use case. So since we know most people don't use the metadata, why don't you? And what holds you back from using it? Great. A lot of people still saying that they do. Files are too large. Typically not a good excuse, in my opinion, considering how long it takes to download a 100 meg file, even if it gets that big. Format being hard to work with, you can get around that, and not trusting it just means you need to push your providers a little bit harder to make that data accurate. So a lot of new people coming up on the scoreboard. Oh. All right. Lowest score wins. Some mass updates. So some of the big challenges that we have for mass updates is that a large spike of listings coming down your pipeline can cause problems. especially if your system can't scale out quickly enough to handle it. So your pipeline may be congested. So you're still processing the million rows that were updated yesterday, and you haven't even reached the new data set yet. Quotas can hold you back. If you have quotas on your system and you don't understand them or you don't know what they are, that can kind of hold you back from being able to download the data fast enough. And even with push systems, which I think push is a good step in the right direction for handling this, but if your push system isn't well designed, a flood of 200 million rows, you're still not going to be able to process those. But you do have some really good ways around that if you're doing a push system. So some of our recommendation is just plan for large bursts of data. That's one of the things that we haven't ever really shied away from. If we're giving you 100,000 rows, typically it's because we think that you need them. Sometimes it's due to data integrity issues that you're not able to see. But if you're consuming it, you need to plan for large bursts of data so that you're not left high and dry when it does happen. Also, highly recommend a fast lane strategy. So again, one of the things that we do is when we're seeing 1 million rows come through the pipeline, but then a customer touches the next row, that moves to the front of the queue. So we like to keep things kind of cycling through and pushing the new stuff forward and bypassing the old data download. Record signature, again, for us is another way that we like to recommend kind of working around this, because reconciliation allows you to skip modification timestamp changes and use record signature to process it. So if you find, again, you're at 1 million records that you've got to process, and you're like, well, let's skip past this and run a reconciliation on an automatic fashion to pick those up. And touched on this a little bit, but the solution for the push systems is just a robust queuing mechanism. If you're processing all that, process the data you want. That's an easily solvable problem on a push system. And knowing your quota, knowing what you have available to you and working within that. So pushing a little bit more on this, and this is kind of something I just want to get people thinking about a little bit more. With Data Dictionary 2.0, there will be a ton of data updates coming down the pipe. At Pain Points last year, I threw out a number. I was like, well, I'm going to update 200 million records tomorrow, and everyone's just going to have to deal with it, and everybody's eyes got really big. And it's because it's not an easy problem to solve. So I really just want to kind of brainstorm, but some of the things that we're suggesting is to stop updating modification timestamp for less important rows. Your basic system that has nothing poured into this and plan on mass consumption, it's going to freeze and you're going to get locked up. So I would say don't update modification timestamp for off-market data, or don't update modification timestamp for old rows, that have been modified years and years ago. Or only update the modification timestamp when the row changes, which most of us try to do as it is today. Consider a second timestamp. That's another thing that we've had to do within ours. We can move data through our pipeline with a timestamp that is not user-facing. So if you're providing data and you're relying on your customers to pull in the same data field that you're using internally, you're always going to run into the struggle of having to figure out how to move your data through the pipe without affecting users. Always spread your batches. So anytime we update 1 million rows, we're updating them in chunks of 5,000. You never want to have all the timestamps the exact same, because how do you iterate through a set that's too large for you to hold in memory? So definitely always spread them out. And then again, another push for record signature, because it's an easy way to know that the row has changed without relying on modification timestamp. And again, using push. If you have a system that has push available, use that where it makes sense. And just some rough stats. These are kind of estimated. They're not real numbers, but when Data Dictionary 2.0 runs out, assuming a user base of like 2,000 users and 200 million rows, we would have to be able to support 500,000 rows per second to be able to support that across the industry. I didn't put in the monetary values here, but obviously egress and ingress are going to get racked up through that. So there needs to be a better plan of attack for updating all these rows for Data Dictionary 2.0. For example, if we only updated active only, that's about 50,000 rows per second that we'd have to support, which is no big deal there. Or if you did active only in the past year, we're looking at about 25,000. So really, I'd just encourage everyone to kind of get this conversation moving as the testing tools are starting to evolve, and as we're all going to be faced with this problem of downloading tons and tons of data, we just need a better approach. Yes?
I think this is a topic there. Have you
changes to 5,000, 10,000. It's quite digestible in the process. So you're talking about adding a checksum and not using modification timestamps. As a data consumer, now I've got to start to have different secondary logic for different systems. We're talking about second timestamp, we're talking about using a checksum. Now I've got 3 different models to do reconciliation, plus whatever else I can create. So I think this is worthy of a lot. I think it's a real problem to solve, but I think it needs a kind of a standard solution so we're not having to program all over the place.
Absolutely. Yep. So if anyone didn't hear Rick, he's calling out the fact that, as we start looking into all these different methods, we don't want to have to code around it for every single vendor. We want a unified standard approach to being able to handle it. How we're kind of suggesting for record signature is that would be part of your baseline reconciliation anyway. So it's still just kind of the two, but it's a very valid point and a good conversation for us to have as a standards body. I haven't seen this in transport quite yet, but we'll certainly bring it up there and start hashing through it. It'll definitely be on the list for pain points. So one final round here. I don't see my timer, but I've got to be close. So this is talking about what do you care the most about? This sort of thing will help kind of drive some of these conversations in the standards or in the transport. What things do you care about the most as a data provider or a data consumer? About 10 more seconds. So yeah, I think this is lines up about how I expected. On-market data is obviously the most important thing we care about. It's the most important thing our agents and our agents' customers care about. A lot of us get caught up in the idea of like, well, I've got this large data set. I want it to be 100% accurate. I don't care about if it's all active, if it's closed. We just want to get it all done. But ultimately, it's the active data that you care the most about. 2 more questions. How many rows do you consider to be a large data update? I've gotten complaints about 1,000 rows. I've gotten complaints about 1,000,000 rows. So curious to see what you personally consider to be a large data set or a large data update. 50 to 100,000. That tends to be about the area where we start getting complaints. I like the last option though, the 7 of you who said, bring it, I can take them all. I like that. I'll give it to you. How many records per hour should a user be allowed to consume? Again, these are all very subjective. I find that anywhere in that 250K to 1 million is a wide range, but less than 10,000 is not really realistic unless you're trying to force real-time access only. And even then, I mean, there's many sites that you run in this room who even doing real-time API calls would not be able to survive at 10,000 per hour. All right, so just kind of a recap. I'm really kind of tied on this record signature concept, so I highly recommend at least considering something like that, talking about it in the groups, reconciling very often, reducing your reliance on modification timestamp for whatever strategy you're going to imply or implement, whether it's something like the signature or push, but just relying on modification timestamp is the root of a lot of data consumption concerns. And use the metadata. All right, so it's the final leaderboard. So the three top prizes, free drink at the bar. Again, Anthony Jordan's got the drinks in the back right corner. So Shannon Wegman. Oh. All right, so Shannon, Jared, and Homer are the top three. So who was Jared and Homer? Anybody? Nice. So back here in the back, and come and see us. And we have a CoreLogic margarita mixer tomorrow at 3:45, so come and check it out. Thank you very much.